Chapter 6, Out West. The transformation was slow, but undeniable. From a broken crowd of survivors to a functioning militia, forged not by choice but by necessity. They started with what they had. Johnny's .44 Magnum, the symbol. A couple of busted lever actions pulled from the trunk of a melted-out cruiser. A sawed-off 12-gauge found duct-taped under a bar counter. One near-mint 10mm pistol, stashed in an old factory manager's office safe beneath a bottle of whiskey. But guns don't last forever. Ammo even less so. And every single bullet was worth blood. So after a few run-ins with ferals, mutated dogs, and one ghoul with its jaw fused around a crowbar like a makeshift tusk, they made a call. Reverse engineer. Break the old world down to build the new one. It started with the mechanics. Elliot Klein and two of the younger engineers from the Vault's Hydro team. Not weapon makers, but practical minds. Set up a workshop in the loom mill's old sorting hall. Over weeks, they dismantled every usable firearm. Studied the extractors. Mapped out firing pin lengths. Created hand-drawn schematics from memory and scratch. They salvaged tools from old garages. Bent steel from car doors. Reinforced grips using hardwood from snapped signposts. Even found half a dozen rebar-laced sledge heads they turned into brutal close-quarters sidearms. Eventually, they had a plan. The Lancaster pattern rifle. Single shot, breech loaded. Chambered for handmade .45 rounds. Rugged, ugly, but reliable. Built from scavenged bike forks, stripped springs, and reinforced water pipe. No optics. No frills. Just purpose. They built 4. Then 10. Word spread. Some called them mill guns. Others called them reclaimers. Johnny just called them Step 1. Because it wasn't about just surviving anymore. They were building a community, not a camp. A defense, not a hiding place. And every time another ghoul snarled through the fence, every time the scouts reported things moving near the edge of the woods, the people of Lancaster stood a little straighter. Because they had fire in their hands again. And this time, it didn't belong to Vault Tech. Johnny stood in the old sorting hall, arms crossed, the dim light of a reclaimed halogen lamp buzzing above him. The workshop around him, once a graveyard of rust and splinters, was now alive. Gear tables. Grease-stained blueprints. Half-built rifle frames stacked in crates. Sparks flew as one of the younger settlers, Isaac, repurposed a sewing machine motor into a crank-feed bullet press. It wasn't just a scavenger's den anymore. It was a forge. Elliot walked in, a wrench slung over his shoulder, wiping grime off his hands. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Johnny smirked. "If we can scavenge 5 more lathes, break down that old belt press, and get the gear mill turning yet, He turned toward the old floor schematics taped to the wall, crisscrossed with black marker lines and hand-scribbled annotations. We stop calling this a workshop. We start calling it a factory. The plan came together fast. Phase 1, Scavenging Raids. An old automotive plant on the east end of the city. Gear teeth, steel rods, motors. 2 high school's metal shop machines, welders, copper wire, electrical parts. A ruined agri-coop warehouse, roller belts, conveyor frame, pressure housings. Old vault bunkers, scrap, pistons, fuel stabilizer remnants. All guarded by ghouls, ferals, and worse. But with the new weapons, the people of Lancaster weren't afraid to take the fight out there. They weren't just reclaiming parts. They were reclaiming agency. Phase 2, Rebuilding the mill. The sorting line was cleared. The upper mezzanine reinforced. One of the old steam valves was converted to power a belt-driven tool array, a Frankenstein machine, but it worked. They welded. They forged. They produced. The first full-scale production line came online in week 3. Mill rifle Mk2. Improved breech lock. Bayonet option. Simplified bolt action. Compatible with scrap-fired ammo. Alongside it, homemade grenades using scavenged canisters and fertilizer. Crude but functional plate armor, mill iron, they called it. Repeating crossbows for silent kills. Scaled down reloading presses made from retooled vice clamps and a repurposed gumball machine mechanism. The noise echoed through the old building now. Hammers. Welders. Grinders. It was beautiful. Not just industry. Not just production. Resurgence. Johnny stood at the loading dock, watching a group of teens carry out 6 freshly built rifles and a crate of casings for patrol use. "You know," Elliot muttered, standing beside him. "If Vault-Tec could see us now, they'd shit themselves." Johnny didn't smile. "Good. I want them to know exactly what it looks like when the Forgotten learn to fight back." Lancaster wasn't just surviving anymore. It was manufacturing a revolution. It didn't happen overnight. Not in a week. Not in a season. But it started. The shift from surviving to building, from a desperate mob of post-vault refugees to a functioning, growing settlement, took hold like a slow fire through dry timber. And over the next 3 years, what rose from the bones of Lancaster wasn't a return to the old world. It was something new. Year 1, wheels and steel. The idea came during a recon run on the edge of the city. Gabe Rowan, a former vault electrician turned tinkerer, cracked open the hood of an old delivery van lodged halfway through the front of an old cafe. Battery was dead. Wiring fried. But the frame, the wheels, still solid. Still usable. Johnny approved a small-scale initiative. Scavenge old cars. Strip them. Repurpose the shells. What started with one wagon, a rusted-out pickup truck bed dragged by chains and scavenged wheels, turned into a fleet of manual carts, sleds, and push wagons. Some powered by pedal rigs, some by crank, and soon, some by force. Because deeper in the city they found something unexpected. Fusion chamber compact cars. Vault-Tec issue. Pre-war luxury. Most were dead. But one? Hidden beneath a garage marked private, DO tag, still shielded. It worked. Barely. Coughing sparks. Plasma cell readout stuttering. But it moved. The engineers called it the Ember. And for the first time since the bombs, Lancaster had a vehicle that drove. It wasn't a convoy, but it was a start. Year 2, liquid gold. Food had stabilized. Water was abundant. But currency? That was the ghost everyone chased. Old world cash. Burned for kindling. Gold. Heavy and useless. Silver. Pretty, but not practical. Johnny called a council. What passed for leadership now? Dozens of ideas were thrown around. Bullet currency? Too dangerous. Work hours? Too difficult to track. And then a voice from the back, Marta, the woman who managed their filtration systems, said it. Water. We trade with water. It's the one thing we can trust. It sounded absurd at first. But as they discussed it, it clicked. Water was measurable, storable, essential, and above all they had control over it. They minted their own system, built from the retooled bottle capping line at the loom mill. W-certs. Hard tokens. Pressed from brass. Each one representing 1 liter of filtered, safe water from the Lancaster deep grid. The tokens were hand-pressed, serialized, coated in lacquer. Soon, every family had a ration ledger. Every trade used them. Barter was still common, but W-certs held value. Survival value. And like that, Lancaster had a currency. One no wastelander could argue with. One people fought for. Year 3, motion and mechanics. With wagons rolling and fuel production underway, the next phase was range. They wanted more than shelter. They wanted influence. Scouting parties were sent out in wagon convoys, fitted with plate armor and armed patrol guards. The Ember led some of them, its battered fusion engine repaired with 3 years of trial and error, now hauling tools and trade goods deeper into the county. Wastelander camps were discovered. Small settlements, some friendly, some violent. In one instance, they found a crumbled Vault-Tec outpost in the hills completely collapsed. Inside, blueprints, vehicle schematics, fusion converters, microgrid expansion plans. That information went straight back to the mill. Within 6 months, they had a new vehicle in testing. The Lantern, a fusion-powered transport built from salvaged trucks, powered rails, and armored plating. Slow, loud, indestructible. By the third year's end, Lancaster wasn't just holding its ground. It was expanding. Trade routes formed. Water for work contracts written. They sent emissaries to other settlements. Built a trading post out near the ruins of Columbia. Even restored a section of the old train yard into a supply depot, guarded night and day. And always, Johnny watched it happen. He didn't lead with speeches anymore. He led with work. With steel. With strategy. But the people remembered who he was. What he'd done. What he'd survived. And every W-cert pressed. Every wagon rolled. Every new fire lit in the dark places of the city was proof. Not just that they'd escaped Vault 717, but that they were never going back. Lancaster wasn't a ruin anymore. It was a rising power. And the world was starting to notice. By the middle of year 3, Lancaster had grown into something visible heard, even beyond the crumbled ridgelines and rust-choked roads. Its smokestacks, its trading patrols, its newly pressed W-certs. And with that growth came attention. Not just from wandering scavvers or merchants passing through, but from settlements. Organized ones. Some peaceful. Some desperate. A few already territorial. But the first real encounter that forced Lancaster to look inward came from just west of the old city limits. West Lancaster. Before the war, West Lancaster had been a borough, a spin-off that wanted its own zip code, its own township lines, its own identity. After the bombs, it became something else. Forgotten. Bypassed. Buried. And yet, it survived. They came at dawn. A scouting group of 6, walking openly, no weapons raised but clearly visible. Not silent. Not hiding. Just approaching. And rotting. Johnny and the patrol were already waiting near the water pump station when the lookouts reported them. The figures were unmistakable even at distance. Sunken skin. Peeling lips. Black eyes. Limbs that moved with stiff, practiced control. Ghouls. But not ferals. Their clothes were intact, layered rags, reinforced plates, even a few stitched armbands with old symbols scratched out and replaced. One wore a pre-war Letterman jacket, faded red with WLHS on the back. And their eyes weren't empty. They stopped at the outer wall of the depot, and one stepped forward. His voice was dry, graveled like sand on stone, but clear. "We're not here to raid. We're from across the river. West Lancaster. We saw your smoke. Heard you've got order." He paused. "We've got some order, too. Food. Trade goods. We're not begging. But we are watching. The patrol wanted to turn them away. Some of the ghouls looked too close to Feral. Twitching hands. Sunken jaws. And the last time the people of Lancaster saw ghouls, they were climbing over fences in the dead of night, screaming like broken dogs. And these newcomers? They didn't like vault survivors. Their leader name was Milo made it clear. While you were underground sipping fungus tea and waiting out the storm, we were up here. Breathing it in. Burning. Watching our skin fall off in chunks. Watching family go feral. So forgive us if we're not falling at your feet. Tension crackled. The kind that would go from cold to bloody in seconds if not defused. That's when Johnny stepped forward. Face half shaded by his hood. .44 Magnum holstered. Eyes hard, but focused. He didn't raise his voice. We didn't choose to be in that vault. Most of us lost more down there than you'll ever know. He paused, scanning their faces, what was left of them. But we're out now. And we're not looking to bury anyone else. So if you're civilized, if you're stable, then we'll talk. We'll trade. We'll share water. You can even walk the market. But if any of you go rabid. He tapped the handle of his revolver once. You'll wish the bombs finished the job. Milo didn't smile. Didn't growl either. He simply nodded once. Fair enough. A tense truce was born. The West Lancaster ghouls were granted market access, escorted, monitored. They brought salvage. Some home-brewed chems. Even rare pre-war tech they claimed to have pulled from the riverbed. And over time, a few names and faces became familiar. A few ghouls even helped reinforce parts of the water line infrastructure. Turns out some had been engineers long before the fire fell from the sky. But that old grudge, the one between the surface burned and the vault born, it didn't vanish. It just settled under the surface like a scar under armor. For now, Johnny told the council. This holds. But don't confuse civility with peace. We're sharing a fire, not a future. And I want eyes on them. Always. Because the ghouls of West Lancaster weren't the only ones crawling out of the cracks. And soon, other shadows would start whispering from the further reaches of the county. Some human. Some not. But all watching. Waiting. And no longer hiding. The truth never hits all at once. It seeps in, like cold through cracked walls. At first, it was just a feeling. Too many eyes watching from shattered windows. Too many shapes on the outskirts. Too many ghouls moving not like mindless wanderers, but like packs. And then the scouts returned. Their maps unrolled on the mill's war table. Their faces pale. Their voices low. We've swept as far north as Mannheim, nothing but ghosts and ghouls. Some nests are feral. Others, organized. South of the Susquehanna, same thing. Roads are broken. Fields poisoned. But the ruins hell, entire towns they've been claimed by ghouls. And not the West Lancaster kind. Johnny leaned over the map. Ash still clung to his sleeves from a recent perimeter flare test. His finger tapped the edges of the marked zone. The county. All of Lancaster. Hundreds of square miles. Rivers. Bridges. Forest. Gone. Infested. Even worse. Some of the older residents, those who'd been just old enough to remember before the war, began recognizing the ghouls from West Lancaster. Not as monsters. Not even as survivors. But as neighbors. That's Helen Greavy. She lived on Marietta. Taught piano lessons. That's Alan fucking Rowe. Jesus. He ran the ice cream truck on Walnut. My kid loved him. And that changed things. It humanized the ghouls. At least the ones still speaking. For the first time, there was grief for them. Not just fear. But not all ghouls came with names. Some came with teeth. With claws. With organized movement. And with rage. Because for every ghoul that walked the Lancaster markets in peace, there were 5 more hiding in broken houses, watching the vault survivors and whispering in half-human voices. They hid while we burned. They were chosen while we were forgotten. They don't deserve the world we bled for. Milo, the West Lancaster leader, didn't sugarcoat it. He told Johnny straight. We got split, same as you. Some of us kept our minds. Some didn't. But most of us, we remember the pain, the betrayal, and a lot of the ones out there, they think you people are the reason they ended up like this. They don't care that you were born in that tin box. They just see Vault-Tec blue and blame. Johnny understood. He didn't like it. But he understood. To make matters worse, scouting parties confirmed the worst. The only other human enclaves in the county were Millersville and Lampeter. Millersville, fortified, paranoid, isolated. Tolerated no ghouls, no outsiders. Took 2 warning shots before they'd even talk. Word was they'd built some kind of leadership council and were stockpiling supplies deep under the university grounds. Lampeter, rural, small, tough. Mixed settlement. No formal leadership, but rumor had it they'd tamed a section of farmland using old world solar tech and irrigation rigs. Independent. Wary. But not hostile, yet. That was it. Everything else. Ghouls. Wandering. Organized. Some even building. Johnny stood on the rooftop of the loom mill that night, watching the stars blink above the ruins. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. Because he already knew what came next. Lancaster wasn't just a settlement anymore. It was a bastion, a front line. And if they wanted to survive the coming tide, they'd need more than water, guns, and wagons. They'd need unity. Because the dead were walking. And not all of them had forgotten why. The council chamber and old loom manager's office, now reinforced with metal plating and maps pinned across every wall, was silent, except for the clink of a pen against the table and the low hum of the generator downstairs. Johnny stood at the head, arms crossed, the W-cert ledger open in front of him. Every name, every unit of water rationed, every drop accounted for. They were stable, not thriving, not rich. But Lancaster had survived 3 brutal years and held its ground. Now, they were standing at the edge of something bigger. And West Lancaster was the key. "We need them," Johnny said, breaking the silence. "The ghouls that'll work with us. The ones like Milo. They know the region better than we do. They've been on the surface longer. They've fought worse things than we have. And if what our scouts are saying is true..." He tapped the edge of the table hard. "This county's becoming a graveyard with a pulse." Marta, head of the waterworks, leaned forward. "We've got clean water, yes, but not excess. Barely enough to keep trade stable. If we offer that up now, even a drip of it, we risk ration cuts." Elliot nodded. "So we find more. Fast. Not just another trickle. We need a reserve. Something deep. Something we don't have to share with our own people." Johnny looked at the map wall. A massive cloth chart, patched and updated daily. Pins marked known aquifers, flow points, surface streams, filtration grids. 3 known Vault-era water stations. All active. All tied to Lancaster's supply chain. He looked at the unmarked spaces. The incomplete sections. Then he jabbed his finger west of the safe zone. Just south of where West Lancaster's territory ended. River Hills. An old pre-war valley filled with farmland, gas stations, and rocky embankments. Largely unexplored because of the high radiation and reports of movement at night. But also, that was a known aquifer region, Johnny muttered. Deep underground irrigation systems for the farmland. Pre-war records mention pressurized well shafts. Maybe even a full-blown municipal backup system, one that wasn't linked to the city. If it existed, it would be untapped, unconnected, and perfect for trade. They could dig it, secure it, tap it, use it to bribe West Lancaster into alliance without bleeding their main stock dry. "We move at first light," Johnny said. "Take a recon team. No more than 6. Check for flow readings, tunnel integrity, and security. If it's clean, we set up an outpost. Small one. Hidden." He turned to Marta. You think we can build another filtration rig? She cracked her knuckles. If you get me a few pumps and something that doesn't explode when it gets wet? Yeah. We can bottle it? Elliot raised an eyebrow. You really think Milo's gonna sell out his fence walkers just for a few barrels? Johnny didn't blink. Not for a few. For guaranteed supply. West Lancaster's got mouths to feed just like we do, and they've got no access to deep filtration. They drink runoff and God knows what from cracked lines and old cisterns. We offer them consistency. We offer control. They'll bite. He looked at the map one last time. Not just as a survivor, but as someone who understood leverage. We need to turn water into power before someone else turns it into war. At sunrise, the recon team rolled out toward River Hills, toward the buried veins beneath the soil, toward the one thing more valuable than bullets: control of the last clean source. The dirt path through River Hills cracked under the weight of the treaded cartwheels as the recon team crept along the old utility corridor, overgrown with spore-thick grass and vines that hissed in the wind. Then, movement. At first, shapes in the tree lean. 5. Maybe more. All ghouls. Not ferals. Not stumblers. They walked with coordination. Purpose. Their eyes glowed faint beneath cracked visors and old-world rags, and their weapons, though rusted, were held steady. Not flailing. Not wild. Johnny stopped mid-step. His jaw clenched. He raised his hand to signal a halt. And then he saw him. Emerging from behind a broken tree trunk and burned-out sedan. A ghoul in T-45 power armor. Not painted. Not pristine. But intact. Shoulder plating reinforced with welded rebar. Helmet scorched black. Visor cracked but still functional. The fusion pack on its back glowed, faint and dirty, but alive. And worse, he was looking right at Johnny. One of Lancaster's scouts muttered behind him, "Oh fuck me running." Johnny snarled under his breath. "That changes nothing." He pulled his revolver from its holster. The chrome glinted like fire in his hand. He looked back at his team. Eyes fierce. Steady. You take the rest. Stay mobile. Don't get pinned. They're organized, but they bleed. He turned toward the walking corpse in the power armor. That one's mine. The ghoul in T-45 cracked his neck. Not a mechanical hiss. A real one. Like bones sliding off memory. He flexed his arms. The armor creaked. Ready to rusted, full-sized power sledge, its edges lined with shattered glass and salvaged saw blades. And then he spoke. Voice like concrete being ground in a blender. Vault Rat. I remember you types. Johnny didn't flinch. Didn't blink. He chambered around. You're about to remember what it feels like to lose. The two charged, guns and screams roaring behind them, the valley exploding into violence. But in the center of it all, just Johnny. Just the T-45 ghoul. And a fight that would echo in steel, hate, and fire. Johnny circled the armored ghoul slowly, boots crunching over broken asphalt and dead leaves. Smoke curled from nearby fires as the rest of the recon team engaged in a storm of chaos, rifle shots, metal on metal, screams of both the living and the long decayed. But in this moment, just the two of them. The ghoul in the T-45 stood like a bunker on legs, breathing like a furnace, that power sledge humming with stored kinetic energy and radiation bleed. And he laughed. Low. Guttural. Dry enough to peel paint. You got nerve, rat. Coming out here with your fancy blue past and your clean skin. He slammed the sledge into the ground once, a sharp boom shaking dust from an old road sign nearby. Johnny holstered his revolver for a heartbeat, cracked his knuckles, then spat blood onto the cracked pavement. You know. He tilted his head, eyes glowing faintly in the smoke-filtered light. You're not much of a fighter. You damn zombie. The ghoul roared and charged. But Johnny was already moving. Sliding under the first swing, drawing his knife mid-dive, dragging it across the exposed wiring just under the left pauldron of the suit. Sparks spit out, just enough to make the thing stumble. That armor doesn't make you invincible. It just slows down your loss. The ghoul turned, swinging wide. The sledge barely missed Johnny's head, carving a crater in the pavement instead. Johnny leapt onto the armor's back, jamming his knife into the fusion vent port, not enough to crack it, but enough to overheat it. You're not a soldier. He leaned in close, whispering as the reactor hissed behind his blade. You're just a corpse in a can. The ghoul screamed, trying to shake him off, stumbling toward a burned-out street sign. Johnny let go just before it slammed into the post, rolling to his feet. Smoke now poured from the back of the armor, its cooling system compromised. Johnny drew the magnum again. Cocked the hammer. One round chambered. Heavy. The ghoul turned, just in time to see him raise the barrel. Lesson 1, Scraphead: never bring cold steel to a firefight. BLAM. The .44 roared, the round slamming dead center through the weakened visor. The ghoul's head snapped back, jerked once and then collapsed, the entire suit dropping like a monument being toppled by time. Johnny exhaled, spun the revolver once, holstered it. Not much of a fighter at all. And then he turned to help his team clean up the rest. Two of the Lancaster scouts hauled the ghoul in by the arms, his coat scorched, jaw cracked, one eye milky and twitching from the burst of concussive grenades earlier in the fight. He snarled and spat like an animal, but his legs didn't work anymore. Johnny could see it. Knees buckled. Armor dented. Blood, actual blood leaking from one ear. They threw him to the ground at Johnny's feet. The ghoul looked up, breathing hard, half delirious with pain and rage. "Bring me their leader," Johnny had said. "That one in the T-45. Too stupid to be calling shots. I want the real one. And I want him alive." The scouts followed orders. And now, here he was. The supposed leader of this roving ghoul warband. Scrappy. Built like a field rat. Clearly dangerous but not a bruiser. A planner. He stared up at Johnny, eyes narrowing with something beyond hate. Fear. "What the fuck are you, smooth skin?" He coughed, hacked black phlegm into the dirt, then pointed with a shaking finger. No one takes a hit from a super sledge and keeps walking. Especially not from power armor. That was a kill shot. I've seen buildings crumble from less. His voice cracked, full of confusion and rage and something closer to dread now. "What the fuck kind of freak are you?" Johnny said nothing. Not at first. He just stood there, staring. The sun was out low in the sky, bleeding through smoke and old cloud cover. And yet, Johnny's eyes began to glow. Not warm. Not yellow. Not even red. But a cold, greenish white like the heart of a reactor seen through a bulletproof window. And the ghoul stopped speaking. His breath hitched. His lips twitched. "What in Adam? What are you?" He tried to scramble back, but the guards held him firm. He looked from face to face, but no one else glowed like that. Only Johnny. Only the one that didn't die. Johnny finally knelt down. Looked him straight in the eye. Voice calm. Steady. "I see. That vault. Vault 717. I had my own encounter with radiation. An FEV. They called it the dark section." The ghoul's expression twitched. Johnny continued. "Me and 30 other kids. Taken at the start of the war. Separated from our families. Locked in the dark with spores and whispers. Turned into monsters." He leaned in closer. The glow of his eyes lit the ghoul's face in an unholy shade of pale green. "Them more than me. They mutated, and they died. Because of the experiment. I didn't mutate." He stood up again. Let the words hang in the wind. But it came with some benefits. And the ghoul? He didn't speak again. He just stared. Because now he understood. They hadn't captured a man. They'd summoned a consequence. The ghoul twitched beneath Johnny's shadow, jaw clenched tight, eyes wide, no longer in defiance, but in shock. In realization. In that silent, heart-sinking dread that only comes when someone realizes they picked a fight with the wrong ghost. Johnny didn't care. He stepped forward, his voice no longer low, no longer calm. It roared. Like the voice of every buried child. Every sealed door. every scream left unheard in the bowels of Vault 717. And if you think your kind is scary, ghoul. His boot kicked dirt over the crippled warband leader, knocking him to his back. Then I hate to break it to you. He drew his revolver not to fire, but to point like a preacher with a book that bled truth. The monsters in the dark section. The ones that whispered in the spores. The thing that drove us out of the vault. He leaned in, voice low now, dark as the steel around them. That thing was nightmare fuel compared to you and your ferals. He stood tall again. Eyes still glowing green-white, unblinking. And I killed it. I tuned the reactor to maximum. I spilled the FEV vats. I gave that thing so much of the drug it craved until its body couldn't hold it anymore. And for the doctors, and the scientists. The ones who stole us. The ones who called it research. I locked them in that vault. And I got the pleasure of watching them rot. Wither. Starve. Just like they did to those kids. The scouts were silent now. Even the ghouls around the perimeter, the ones watching from the ruins, ready to flank or counterattack, they froze. Like animals sensing fire. Johnny wasn't a man anymore. He was a living warning. He raised his voice one last time. Not to the ghoul. Not just to him. To all of them. To the shadows. To the broken rooftops and half-dead wanderers peering from behind vines and concrete. Now you will go. And you will tell every one of your kind, every ghoul, every warband, every scaver with a grudge and a broken rifle. What happened here? What happened in that vault? Who I am. He stepped forward into the full light of day, eyes blazing like two cold stars. My name is Johnny Vanjik. And you will not stop us from saving our city. From saving our home. The ghoul didn't argue. Didn't spit. Didn't curse. He just nodded, slow and haunted, and was dragged away by Lancaster scouts. Back into the ruins. Back to tell the tale. And across the broken county, from Millersville to Lampeter, from feral dens to crumbling overpasses. A name began to spread. Not whispered. Not feared. Respected. Johnny Vanjik. The Vault Ghost. The one who came out of the dark. And started fighting back.